Hello, my name's Elaine. I'm the Home and Well advisor. I'm also the Home and Well coordinator for the Home and Well project. I'm going to read through a recent case study of a client that I was working with, and hopefully it will provide some sort of valuable insights into the help that our project provides and the long-term benefits and outcomes for the clients that engage with the Home and Well project. So recently I received a referral from an agency that was working in the local hospital, as well as working remotely due to the COVID-19 restrictions. The client's husband has been in hospital for around 3 months, and she hadn't been able to visit him as the hospital was in lockdown. Mrs. B wanted to get her husband home and was prepared to give up work and become a full-time carer, along with the support from a local care agency. The social care team in the hospital felt that her husband really needed residential nursing care, but agreed to let Mrs. B try having her husband home again. The discharge was arranged when I first made contact with Mrs. B, and he was due home in 2 to 3 weeks' time. At the first contact over the phone, I explained about the Priority Service Register, the PSR, and the free benefits this service provided, particularly when caring for a person at home with a long-term health condition. The client immediately saw the benefits of the PSR and mentioned that her husband needed to be kept warm and that she would have a lot of extra washing to do due to her husband's health condition. Mrs. B allowed me to sign her up to the service. She mentioned that she didn't have access to the internet and that her mobile phone was a very basic type. We went on to discuss energy and water tariffs. Mrs. B didn't really know very much about them, as until recently her husband had managed all the finances. I asked if she would like me to help her to understand their financial situation better, as it appeared her husband would now be too unwell to manage the finances when he returned home. Mrs. B agreed that this would be a good idea. She was a little worried when I mentioned gathering together their bank statements. She said, "I'm a bit worried about scams and giving out details about their bank accounts." I said she was quite right to be very cautious, but I explained that she wouldn't be disclosing the bank account numbers. She would just be going through the bank statement so that we could complete the income and outgoings budgeting sheet over the phone. I arranged a call back to Mrs. B in a week's time to allow her to gather together all the bank statements. Ideally, we needed 3 months' worth. Mrs. B felt that all their bills were paid by direct debit or standing order. At the second phone call, Mrs. B was well prepared and had all the paperwork to hand, and had actually had a look at their expenses, something she hadn't thought to do before. We completed the financial assessment together over the phone using our casebook budgeting sheet. I also carried out a welfare benefit check. Mrs. B was quite disappointed that she wasn't entitled to carer's allowance because she was already of state pension age. I reminded Mrs. B to request that the attendance allowance be reinstated as soon as her husband returned home. We based the financial assessment on current situation, but without Mrs. B's income. This showed that with all the bills paid, they had around £448 a month disposable income. Mrs. B also had her own savings of around £35,000. I checked what energy and water discounts might be available, and I realised that their income was too high to qualify for energy and water discounts. I suggested it was worth Mrs. B calling her energy provider to see if she was on the best tariff for their situation. Mrs. B said she would do this. She also explained that her husband was due to be discharged and would be coming home early next week, which she was pleased about, but also a bit anxious about if she would cope. Her employer had given her time off work so that she could work out how the new routine was going to work. I asked if there was anything else I could help her with. Mrs. B disclosed that she had been told that if her husband needed residential care, that they would have to sell their home to pay for his care. Mrs. B felt she had no alternative but to care for her husband at home or risk losing their home. I reassured Mrs. B that this isn't true, having previously worked in the department that made these decisions in a past role. I said I would check the current government guidelines and call her back in 2 weeks' time. As with her husband coming home next week, her routine may be a little all over the place as she made the new adjustments. Mrs. B agreed, so I booked another appointment for 2 weeks. At the third phone call, Mrs. B said she had had a very difficult time last week and had felt quite low. But this week, everything was starting to fall into place. Her husband was much more settled. The company she worked for was closing, and as she had worked for them for some time, she would be due a redundancy payment. I explained that I had checked the government guidelines on residential property disregards. I explained the guidance and that because she was over 60 and this was her main and only home, the government stated that the property must be disregarded from any financial assessment relating to residential care charges. I explained that her husband would contribute to moving into residential care by using any pensions and savings. Mrs. B was very relieved, and I said I would send her by post the relevant documents relating to this. Mrs. B had spoken to the electricity company and they had changed her tariff to a 2-year fixed, which was more economical. She had also received a letter to say her property was now registered on the Priority Service Register. Mrs. B was very grateful for the phone calls and the guidance the Home and World advisor had been able to provide her during this big change in her life. She said that it was great having somebody neutral to talk to. I suggested that if there was a decision made about her husband needing residential care, to contact me about any concerns or unanswered questions she may have. I asked Mrs. B if she would be happy to be contacted again about the service she had received from the Home and World project. She said she would be very happy and would recommend Home and Well and Citizens Advice to anyone who was looking for a bit of support and guidance. I thanked Mrs. B and wished her and her husband all the best. The long-term benefits and outcomes for this client engaging with the Home and Well project are as follows. PSR provides reassurance that her energy and water provider know that they have some vulnerabilities. Mrs. B is able to access priority services should she need them. She would know in advance if there was going to be any planned disruption of supply and would receive support with this, as well as help during emergency situations, for example, power cuts and floods. Mrs. B's husband, until quite recently, had managed the household budget. For all of their married life, some 50 years, this is the way it had been. When it became clear that her husband would no longer be able to do this, she felt overwhelmed by all the extra responsibility. By completing the financial assessment together, Mrs. B began to have a better understanding of their income and outgoings. She started to feel more confident and was happy to contact her energy provider and discuss the best deal for her and her husband, something she would never have had the confidence to do before. Her confidence grew further because she had managed to make a saving by switching tariffs. Mrs. B was struggling to decide if she could afford to give up work to care for her husband. The completion of the financial assessment provided evidence that they could manage with a reduction in her income. A big relief for Mrs. B. During the second phone call, Mrs. B disclosed that she was certain that if she couldn't care for her husband at home, that she would have to sell their home to pay for his care. She didn't know what would happen or where she would live. My feeling was that Mrs. B had misunderstood what had been said to her by social services. Nevertheless, this thinking was adding a lot of pressure and creating anxiety for her. Once I explained the way the process worked, Mrs. B felt that she could relax and not worry so much, and was able to concentrate on caring for her husband and managing the household. Mrs. B felt able to move forward with the new knowledge she had gained during her time of working with the Citizens Advice Home and Well Advisor. She also felt that if she needed further help, she knew where to turn in the future. Thank you. Thank you for listening.